do that. Well, I guess it has started.
So
I'm glad I
let's
asked you
see.
before that came up. Dr. Reddy, would you please attempt to share your screen and make sure that that works?
Sure.
Beautiful.
Do you see it?
I see. Yes, I do.
Okay. So it should be okay, I think. Yep.
Perfect.
So you want me to stop sharing? It's okay.
You can leave it there. I think
Okay.
that'll be okay.
Sure.
I can see other FDA colleagues here are
Yeah.
logging in.
Okay. So I was surprised when I got Cindy copied several of FDA folks. I said, wow, okay. So I thought it's going to be just the graduate students from IIT, but that's interesting. So I know some of them in Chicago FDA.
Hi, Glenn.
Did you say Glenn?
I did. I said,
Yeah.
Glenn,
Hi.
long time no talk.
I know.
Yeah. And Arlette and Benu.
Hello, Dr. Glenn.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We may be a tad short on our own faculty today, as the
Okay.
University Faculty Council called an all faculty meeting to coincide with our seminar.
Ooh,
So
we could wait a few more minutes so everybody could join if they want to.
I think we'll give until maybe 2 or 3 after the hour, and then we'll
Sure.
go ahead and get started. Hi, Xinyi.
Hi, Todd.
So I was just looking at the chat. Benu, are you there? Are you able to unmute and talk to me?
Hi, Todd. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Cindy popped in because she was the one who originally hosted the meeting, and she was supposed to give me host access, and it appears she gave it to you instead.
Okay. How do I pass it on to you?
I'm not exactly sure. Let
That's
me,
strange.
yeah.
Want me to log out? If I
No,
log out?
don't.
No?
No,
Okay.
I'm afraid that would cancel the meeting.
Okay.
Give me a second here, and I'll see the process for making this change.
That's so odd.
Okay. Okay, hover over someone, a user's video. So you should, if you hover over my video
Your
and
video.
then click the ellipsis that's there.
Says more. Okay, make
Okay.
host.
Yes, that should be it.
Did that work? Do you want it to change the host to tab? Yes.
Yeah.
Got it?
You have, yes, it says I am now the host. Perfect. Thank you for
Yay.
your help.
No
I
problem.
appreciate that.
You have the
Anytime.
control, yeah.
There you go. Much,
I'll mute
much
myself.
better. I was wondering how come I still couldn't do stuff. There we go. All right, I see that Britt's on. Dr. Reddy, do you know Britt Burton-Freeman? She's our department chair.
No, sorry, yeah. The last 2 years, we did not have the meetings like that, any food safety or nutrition meeting to go and talk to folks, so.
Yeah, that's made things a little more difficult as far as collaboration and whatnot,
Right.
for sure. Well, I think we're at 3 after the hour. I think it's a good time to start. Welcome everyone to our Department of Food Science and Nutrition seminar. We're glad to have you here with us today. I'm actually going to turn the time over to Vara Sudagar, who is one of our PhD students, so that she can introduce our speaker today. I will say before we do that this meeting is being recorded. So go ahead, Vara.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a great pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Shanker Reddy from USDA. Dr. Shanker Reddy currently serves as the interdisciplinary scientist in the Science and Technology Monitoring Programs Division's Pesticide Data Program in the USDA Agricultural Marketing Service. Prior to that, he led the Microbiological Data Program to its national recognition in food safety. He also worked in the USDA FSIS Office of Food Defense and Emergency Preparedness. He also served as a senior advisor for food safety, nutrition, and health in the Office of Chief Scientist in the USDA. Prior to joining the federal government in 2003, he led several programs on the development of vaccines against bacterial pathogens and discovery of signature molecular biomarkers for inflammation and cancer in humans for the development of drugs in biotechnology companies. He also worked in academia at University of Texas Health Science Center on bacterial pathogenesis. He graduated with a PhD from the University of Florida. Welcome, Dr. Shanker Reddy. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Vara. So you all can see the slides now?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So thank you. So I'm so delighted for this opportunity. Really, thank you. So the year 2021 was the 30th anniversary of this Pesticide Data Program, PDP. So this is the only national level monitoring program for pesticides in foods consumed in the United States. So I assumed many of you may not know about PDP, but then I saw FDA folks being copied. So anyway, I will present an overview of PDP operation that generates a lot of data on foods, on pesticides, and how the data are collected and used, and even some trends. So to introduce you to the beginning of the program, PDP was created in 1991 as the part of the Presidential Food Safety Initiative. But its support for the USDA mission started in 1996 with the introduction of the Food Quality Protection Act. That's the FQPA. Since this is a national level monitoring program, it uses the state departments of agriculture to collect samples and test them for pesticides. So, and we gather this data, analyze the data, and report to the public actually. So the program gives emphasis on the commodities highly consumed by infants and children. It provides the data to Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, for dietary risk assessments, pesticide re-registration reviews, and establishing the maximum residue limit or the level, the MRLs, the tolerances. It also provides the data to Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and other governmental agencies upon request to make some informed decisions. So we'll talk about this later. So to give you a bird's eye view of the program operation, it starts with sending out annual cooperative agreements to all participating states that collect and test samples. Around the same time, we send out sampling and shipping schedule to the participating states. So then the states collect the samples and ship them to the testing laboratories under strict chain of custody requirements. The state laboratories process and analyze the samples and enter the results in the encrypted, secure PDP database. The results are reviewed, reconciled, and analyzed in headquarters in Washington, DC. Then the annual summary is written. So after reviews and clearance from the agency to release the summary, it's made available to the public. So if you all wonder who finances the program, the funds come directly from congressionally appropriated line item budget. So currently, there are 9 states shown in green that participate in the program and receive the funds. The number of states have been shrinking the last several years over the budget cuts, and yet the important thing is that we maintain the required number of samples to be collected and tested for the national inference. The samples are collected in participating states, but it can originate from non-participating states. That's shown in yellow, or even internationally. So the number of yellow states are also increasing. For example, from Colorado, the produce are shown to move to Utah and Wyoming. So annually, PDP collects about 10,000 food samples, resulting in approximately 2.5 million pesticide commodity paid data points. The program chemists act as liaisons to the states, and with the help of IT staff, we all take care of the sampling, laboratory needs, audits, and data review, etc. So how do we select the commodities that we test every year for the last 30 years? So we primarily consult the EPA's Office of the Pesticide Programs, the Health Effects Division, but we also consult FDA and the USDA's Foreign Agriculture. So we periodically evaluate the selection of commodities based on the data needs by EPA, also by market needs and a set of the requirements. Usually, the commodity selected will be a representative of a crop group. If you take carrot, for example, it belongs to crop group 1, which is the root and tuber vegetables group, as listed in 40 CFR Part 180. So each quarter in a given year, new commodities are introduced when others leave the program. So here is the typical commodity rotation. Fresh fruit and vegetables are rotated once in 2 years, covering the seasonality, while the processed fruit and vegetables are rotated once every year. For example, so baby foods come under processed foods and are tested only once a year. As an example, beginning 4th quarter of this year and into 2023, several baby foods like pears and peaches, applesauce, carrots, green beans, sweet potatoes, and peas will be tested. So testing commodities under specialty group is usually considered special project. They usually run about 6 months to 1 year. So since its inception in 1991, PDP has tested 126 commodities, and mostly, as you know, fruit and vegetables. Some of the commodities have been through the program only once, while others may have been rotated several times. So we are not currently testing meats and water anymore. However, we do test whole eggs, whole milk, and fish, like catfish and salmon. Let me close this window. Yeah. So in the next 2 slides, I will describe how the sampling is done. As you know, it's the most important first step. So PDP works with USDA National Agricultural Statistics Service, NAS, to devise a nationally representative sampling plan based on the populations of the 9 participating states. So NAS uses the probability proportional to size, PPS model, to determine how many samples are to be collected in these states, and even the sites within the states. So accordingly, most samples are collected in California, followed by New York, Texas, Florida, and so forth. So there are more than 600 active sites across the nations. So within the states, larger facilities with a larger volume and distribution of commodities are sampled more often than the smaller ones. So PDP works with NAS and state sampling partners to generate a quarterly sampling schedule. So sampling sites include locations closest to the consumer. So this includes distribution centers and terminal markets. Also, more product information is available at these sites. So PDP's sampling approach means its data represent consumer exposure levels as opposed to farm gate levels. So this allows time for degradation of pesticides applied pre and post harvest. This is important for pesticide dietary risk assessment. But it's also important to note that PDP is not a regulatory program. So on a voluntary basis, we invite potential sampling sites to the program. So on sample collection, the trained state samplers randomly collect the whole boxes or cartons of samples of the terminal markets. So they include domestically grown and imported, organic and conventionally grown foods, all done randomly for a national inference. So targeted samplings are only done as special projects. So all available information, including origin, organic claim, etc., are captured electronically by the sample collectors on site and transmitted to PDP via our electronic remote data system. This is done before the samples are shipped to the laboratories for analyses. So samples are either transported immediately to the lab within the state, I mean, they drive them to the laboratory, or shipped overnight to the assigned state lab. So the chain of custody is maintained from the sampling sites to the testing laboratories. So another important aspect of the sampling has been that excess samples, because we have to buy them in huge carts and cartons, huge amount of samples. So after removing the amounts of required sample for testing, they have been donated to the local food banks and homeless shelters in their own states. So this is important because not only the fresh fruit and vegetables, often hard to get, are given to the people in need, but also it contributes to reducing food waste and loss. For example, last year, so PDP donated close to 54,000 pounds of food to these local food banks. So this is an extremely monthly overnight transshipping flight schedule for the last quarter of 2021. So it looks like an airline flight paths, but rarely we had any problems. So I must thank Chris Pappas for this slide. So he's our sampling manager for almost 20 years and just retired last week. So on sample receipt and preparations, samples are inspected at the receiving lab, and usually they check them for temperatures and acceptable appearance. And samples are then prepared using the common consumer practices, such as washing the commodity under gently running cool water. They remove the peels, stems, or husks, but the homogenization is performed often using a laboratory grade food processor. So the samples are then separated into analytical portions. Catches is the method used for the extraction procedures by the state labs. Catcher stands for quick, easy, cheap, effective, rugged, and safe. So this is a multi-residue method that allows the state laboratories to perform the extraction of hundreds of pesticides in less time with less cost, and importantly, with less hazardous waste. However, specific procedures may be used by the laboratory and they may vary by commodity, but they're all validated. So on sample analyses, how do we select the pesticides to test these samples? So which is based on selection of pesticides is based on the US pesticide registrations by EPA and any specific needs that we work with EPA to add to the testing list. So they include usually the older pesticides like carbamates, organochlorines, organophosphates, but also the newer classes of neonicotinoids, pyrethroids, and triazoles. All the labs use tandem gas and liquid mass spectroscopies for analysis with very low limits of detections in parts per billion range. So as of 2021, PDP has tested for over 780 pesticides, their metabolites or isomers and environmental contaminants, like legacy compounds. Labs may also use single analyte method when necessary, example being testing for glyphosate. The important thing is that PDP has a robust quality assurance and quality control QA/QC operation. All state labs that work with the PDP should be accredited to ISO 17025 that formally recognizes the competence of these laboratories. However, the integrity of data is supported by annual proficiency tests, twice internally and once using an external provider like FAPAS, that's the Food Analysis Performance Assessment Scheme. So all commodities entering the program must be validated through a method validation process prior to analyzing PDP samples. So this process requires experimental determination of limits of detection, so LODs, and limits of quantitation, LOQs, and method performance and precision and accuracy. In addition, all the labs will include LODs are routinely verified along with blanks, spikes, process controls in each sample set. So this is the reason why you may not have heard about it. They call it a golden standard. So because the data is used to buy for many purposes. The labs do follow PDP standard operating procedures, but they can tailor their own state SOPs to fit their individual requirement upon validations. So the next couple of slides, I'll talk about our remote data entry system, RDE. So we have two systems, one for sampling and one for laboratory test results. Here for sampling, we have the eSIF system, which is the electronic sample information form. It's a Windows-based standalone system used by more than 150 samplers across the US. They enter sample information through pull-down windows like collection state, date, commodity, site code, lab code, state or country of origin, whether it's fresh or frozen, and the variety, imported or domestic, and the grower, packer, distributor names and addresses, lot numbers, and even pictures. So this encrypted data are then sent to headquarters and to the laboratories. So the laboratory RDE system that is a local or distributed software built with MS Office tools. Labs can import complete data sets from LIMS or enter and submit. Again, this encrypted data is sent via USDA emails, then to the headquarters where they're imported into central database. Once the chemists review and approve them, they'll be uploaded to PDP database. So what do we do with all this data? We publish PDP data. So all its data are available to the public as an annual summary, which can be downloaded as PDF file via our website. You can also use the link at the bottom. So if you go there, www.ams.usda.gov/PDP, you get all the information. So there is a link in the, let's see, go back there. Yeah, you can also get printed copies, but you need to request for it. So the annual summary data are also available in the form of downloadable database. This includes an information on the program, many tables and figures of analyzed data. On the website, there is an access-based downloadable database is also available. It is broken down by year and can be queried and exported for additional use. Another important feature in this website is that there's a database search tool for anyone to use. So there are closer to 300,000 samples being tested and analyzed, and about 41 million data points. So it's a great tool, actually embraced by JMPR, WHO, and risk assessment agencies and industries. So quickly, let me plug in this user-friendly database tool. You can use it like everyone else, and it has data since 1991 for all the commodities and pesticides tested. So you can click on the new search and check on the commodity or commodities, pesticide or pesticides of interest. All are chosen here. But you can also click commodity history or the pesticide history to get to a desired commodity and the pesticide to limit the data search time. So there are user guides, codes used in the data analysis, and also contact information to help you with the search. So here on the application part, you can choose any one of the 5 in the output performance for individual results or summary of results, and any one in the 3 results preferences for individual results, and launch. So you get the data generated. It can be exported in Excel CSV form and saved for further analysis. You can also use the filter below the boxes to get your choices. So it's a great tool. So I thought I'll give you a snapshot of our 2020 results, because just last month we released the annual summary. So we had about 15 fresh and 4 processed fruit and vegetables, total of 19 commodities tested in 2020. I must thank Jessica Mario in our office for compiling the 2020 results into tables and figures. So I'll be remiss if I don't talk about the COVID pandemic impact on the program. Every state was affected by both federal and state COVID prevention measures. This graph illustrates the COVID-19 related impact on the PDP sampling operation. Look at the blue line that represents the percentage of regularly scheduled samples collected. So normally this line hovers around 100%, as you see, for January and part of February 2020. It's a flat line with very few and rare fluctuations ever. In March 2020, the global COVID-19 pandemic began impacting PDP sampling operations. In the first 2 weeks of the impact, 7 out of 10 PDP sampling states suspended the collections. So sampling operations were severely impacted, as you see in April. Only about 33% of samples were collected. First, the makeup samples were collected in May as some states reopened. PDP issued guidance prioritizing mixed commodities to minimize the potential of impact on the seasonality and the number of samples. By September, the sampling operations had resumed in 9 out of 10 PDP states. In October, all 10 states resumed sample collections. And this was the first month since February in 2021 with no missed samples. Again, in December, the sample collection was suspended in 1 state. Still, more than 95% of our 2020 target samples were collected, thanks to the state sampling personnel for dedication and hard work. On a side note, despite the continued pandemic impact, more than 95% of targeted samples were collected and tested in 2021. So the laboratories also took a hit by managing through the workload, through lockdowns and safe distancing, sequestration to complete the sample analysis, but they did. So kudos to them. So on the commodity distribution and sample origin in 2020, the fresh and processed fruit and vegetables accounted for 100% of the total sample tested, which is about 9,600. So usually that's rare because we only had fruit and vegetables in 2020. 82% of the samples were fresh fruits and vegetables, and processed fruit and vegetables constituted about 18%. So although PDP samples were collected from 10 states, the sample origin data showed 34 states in US and 34 foreign countries based on the information that the samples collected at the time of collection. So the domestic samples accounted for about 60% of the total samples collected, while about 35% of them are imported. So the import data usually varies depending on the commodities that are collected and tested. So it ranges from anywhere between 20 to 35%. So the 5% of the samples we call as mixed national origin because they have more than one country listed, and about 0.7% of the samples had no known origin. So if I expand on the domestic versus imported, for example, 95% of cauliflower and collard greens were domestically grown, whereas 100% of bananas and 94% of blueberries were imported. So of the processed commodity, more than 98% of tomato paste was produced domestically. So if you look at all the samples collected, analyzed, approximately 1/3 of them are packed and distributed in or from California, which is our leading agriculture production states and most popular state where we get most of samples sampled and tested, and also our state partner. So here is a good take-home message from 2020 data. The program tested 9,600 samples for 584 pesticides and their metabolites. 30% of the sample tested had no detectable pesticide residue at all. Over 99% of the sample tested had residues below the tolerances established by EPA. So out of 9,600 samples, only 47, that's 0.49%, exceeded the EPA tolerances. In that 47 samples, 35 of them were domestically produced. Again, out of 9,600 samples, 303 samples, that is 3.2%, had pesticides with no tolerances established by EPA. We call them as NTEs. So in the domestic samples were about 199. So the NTEs pesticides are added to the list based on the recommendation from EPA. So in these commodities, apple juice, bananas, broccoli, cantaloupe, cauliflower, kiwi, orange juice, summer squash, and tomato paste, there were no tolerance exceeders. And apple juice and bananas, there were no tolerance established exceeders or so it's clean. So I just want to touch upon the two slides. Folks usually ask how PDP data is used for a model establishment. We don't do it, as you know, EPA does it. So I extracted some of the general information from EPA presentations, and I have to thank them. As you know, EPA has its own comprehensive system to collect residue data. So I've listed a few, like conducting several field trials based on the proposed label maximum with geographic representation of where the crop is grown and toxicological concerns of the pesticide. But it also uses the PDP monitoring data so much, and also data from other sources like what we eat in America and EPA's FCID for generating MRLs. So here's the graphic representation, how they arrive at dietary exposure levels. As you see, it uses data from several sources, data from food consumption, raw agriculture commodity consumption, food recipe database, PDP residue data, and to calculate the tolerance levels. So what happens is we give EPA all our data and work with them and see what they need and what we can do. So I thought I would talk about some trends. So I would like to, I took database, the database that you saw, you could also use it, and got some numbers. So I used the commodities that Environmental Working Group, EWG, that publishes annual list of dirty dozen, solely using PDP annual data. So some of you may know this group. So what I took was EWG's top 5 fruits and 6 vegetables that I looked at the violations. So these were the ones that EWG determined dirty dozens. So I looked at 10 years of data, but want to remind you that these commodities were not tested every year in those 10 years because we have rotations. For example, apples were tested in 2009, 2010, 14, 15, and 16. Strawberries were tested in 2008, 2009, 2014, and 15, and 16. However, if you look at the number of samples that had violative levels of pesticides and the pesticides with no tolerances, that NTEs, they were extremely small. Apples had the smallest tolerance violation. Strawberry had more tolerance violations at 1.3% out of close to 3,000 samples tested. Nectarines, peaches, and strawberries had more NTEs, that's a no tolerance established violations, at 4, 6.3, and 2.3 respectively. So similarly, if you look at this top 6 vegetables from EWG group, kale had more violated samples at 2.5% out of more than 2,000 samples tested. Spinach had 6.3 no tolerance established NTE violations out of 3,000 samples. We also want you to know, so many of these NTEs, that's no tolerance established levels, were actually below the quantifiable levels, PQLs, in many cases. So I also looked at top 10 most positive pesticides found in both in fruit and vegetables, but are found more than in one commodity. So here are the results. Basically, boscalid, imidacloprid, and pyraclostrobin were present both in fruit and vegetables. So this is just the way you could look at the data that you can download and analyze for whatever your use may be. So next couple of slides, I will summarize the information. So let me begin with some important uses of PDP. So as you know, PDP data are used by EPA as one of the sources of information for establishing tolerances in food, as well as re-registration reviews of pesticides. The presumptive violation data are shared with the FDA for surveillance purposes because FDA enforces compliance to EPA tolerances. PDP data is also used by the USDA Foreign Agricultural Service to resolve trade disputes and promote trade. We were able to help them on few occasions to resolve trade issues. We also work with the grower groups to improve agriculture practices. We inform them when their commodities are being tested, and they also reach out to us for data and other information. So in general, our data increases the consumer confidence in US food supply. Basically, we promote eat your fruit and vegetables to meet your daily dietary requirements. So we get questions and requests, data from public stakeholders, academia, and industry almost every day in the US and abroad. We respond to them immediately. So please feel free to contact PDP with any questions or comments. So thank you. That's all I have.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Reddy. We would love to take some time. We have some time here to have some questions. Are you open to answering some questions?
Sure.
Great. So does anyone have any questions for Dr. Reddy? If you do, go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to put your camera on and you can ask your question. Don't everybody jump at once.
Okay, look it up in the chat.
We do have a couple of students in class on the call here who are part of our seminar class, and we'd love to have them ask you some questions if they have a couple.
Sure.
Bara and Xingyi.
It's a really informative presentation, Dr. Shanker Reddy. And you know that the amount of pesticide, and then it's not that much, so that the people should outweigh the advantage of eating the fruits and vegetables rather than withdraw themselves from not eating it. So thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't put a lot of results and stuff because I thought I'd give you an overview of the program, how we do certain things, and it probably differs from FDA. They do differently. Sometimes they even cook the food, and so what we do is what is present to the consumers and what they do at home. And also we don't go to the grocery stores and retail stores, because one, we don't get information on where those produce or fruit and vegetables came from. Also, if we find any contamination, it's very hard to identify the source because it's been handled and displayed and all kinds of stuff. So we go to essentially to the huge wholesale and distribution centers. And some of them are so humongous, it looks like almost a city.
Any other questions or comments? All right, well, I'm not going to force anyone to ask a question. So again, we really appreciate your time, Dr. Reddy. Thank you so much for being willing to come and speak with us today. If people do think of things that they want to ask you about, are you all right with them contacting you?
Yes, of course.
Excellent.
I should have put my email address. It's probably Vara has my email address. Yeah. So she could distribute to them and directly comes to me, I can answer those questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for attending. We'll end the seminar for today, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Thanks.